Hiya! Welcome to this, my 30th episode of VideoFuzzy. I'm your host, Terry J. Aman, and in this installment, titled Exploring Filtered Lives, I take another deep dive with Robin Williams in The Final Cut. I had a chance to meet up with a friend of mine from college to chat a bit about the first shows I ever recorded. Finally, along with another milestone I'll be touching on briefly, we're another 10 episodes along, so it's time for another progress report with By the Numbers. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.
Oh, and for a good long while I've been puzzling over what to do with the space between my theme and my Friday night feature lead-in. This one seems to be an unusually good one to try something new. I'll take a moment to let you know what, if anything, has been going on with me as I'm putting this episode together. As some of you might have noticed, this episode is posting very, very late. After spending the latter half of June putting my anniversary special together, Ralph and I decided to take a little wee time, during which we traveled to Medora, North Dakota, and to Peoria, Illinois, not to mention an evening enjoying the fireworks over South Mandan for the 4th of July. Also, my laptop gave up the ghost just as I was putting episode 29 together, so I've been migrating some functionality to the PC we bought in December. Along with all of that, I've just been struggling to catch up with quite a large backlog of media. In that time, I made some good progress on this project, and I'm hoping I can do it all justice.
Friday night feature!
I thought with this being my 30th episode, I wanted to do something a little different. Among the earlier shows I brought in with this project was the IFC presentation of The Final Cut, which I found split across discs 78 and 79 in my collection. The Final Cut is a psychological speculation starring Robin Williams as Alan Hackman, a cutter. In a world where implants can record the visual and audio life experiences of people over the course of their lives, Alan is one of those responsible for receiving the information and editing it together for rememory ceremonies. They're vague as to when this is happening, at least 50 years from now, or rather 2004 when the film was made, written and directed by Omar Naim. In his vision, things don't look significantly better or worse or different from today's world. There's a couple of intriguing points. Members of a cyberpunk resistance get themselves tattooed with electrostatic ink that interferes with the implant's recordings, and the resistance movement attacks funerals in the way anti-abortion protesters protest clinics, which is, well, for one thing, the life has been lived, the memories cut together, and the life celebrated. Protesting at this point is ridiculous, and if you don't want an implant, don't have one. The inclusion of these scenes heightens the social disruption of the procedure and of the corporation that invented this. The argument is that people are protesting always being surveilled, there's no privacy, no consent to being part of someone else's memories, and some corporation, the I Corp, archives people's lives and no one has any say in it. There's also a bit of mystery as to the nature of the recording, but when we see it, as Alan sees it, it appears to tap directly into the optic nerve, though some people's recordings pick up dream imagery, during which presumably the eye would mostly be seeing nothing at all, so maybe the signal is picked up through the visual cortex, which raises questions about the audio source for the recording, but yep, that's me digressing again. There are rules to being cutters, the people who process the information from the implants. They can't themselves have an implant because they're privy to such sensitive information, and they cannot sell memories or cut them together from different people. Some of the drama in Alan's life comes from pursuing Delilah, a woman he saw in someone else's memories. Also, he's carrying around a load of guilt from his childhood where he thought he was responsible for the death of a playmate, Lewis, who fell while they were playing in an old barn and moved away before he got any resolution on that. Anyway, while he's cutting together the memories of Bannister, an I-Corp CEO whose implant basically implicates him in pedophilia against his own daughter, Alan sees Lewis, the grown version of the boy he thought he'd killed. He has to be sure, though, all these years of guilt, he needs to track him down and find him. Unfortunately, since Bannister met him at that party, he finds that Lewis has actually died. All the while, he's avoiding a resistance leader, James Caviezel, as Fletcher, a former cutter who wants to steal the CEO's implant to find some way to disgrace the implant corporation. Alan's got no time for this. He's got to find out about Lewis. On a file search for Lewis, Alan discovers his own file, that he's got an implant that his late parents never told him about. His fellow cutters react with violence, but he never knew that they'd bought him an implant, and they died before they could tell him. So, all the same, as expensive as these things are meant to be, you'd think they'd have a receipt, or some literature, or you'd just know, like, damn, so that's why I always beep when I try to board an airplane, or die when I get an MRI. But since Alan finds out he's got an implant, he can review the footage from what happened to him with Lewis. In fact, Lewis was hurt in the fall, but Alan's memory was different from his implant's recording. What he thought was blood on the floor was actually red paint. He'd never killed anyone. He's not guilty of murder. Sadly, right after he makes this discovery, there is a quick confluence of bad things. Alan seeks out some implant scrambling body art, which Fletcher naturally finds out about. Ellen was already on his radar for working on Bannister's memories, but also Delilah has discovered her old boyfriend's memories on Ellen's editing machine, where Ellen has apparently been spying on their past relationship, and she flips out about it and destroys the machine, and with it the CEO's recording. All the same, Fletcher has put two and two together with Ellen's getting that tattoo. If Bannister's implant had incriminating information about him, it would be on Ellen's implant too. Brilliant! Fletcher targets Ellen, chasing him through the graveyard, where Ellen is killed by yet another cutter for breaking the code. Two things. If there's an implant, it's going to have Wi-Fi. Not a chance in hell we've got these super expensive implants and you can only access it once you're dead. Heck, a technique developed by Fletcher, a dangerous one, allows people to access their implants while they're still alive. When they first hooked Alan up to it, it was wild to see him looking through an endless tunnel of monitors. But you'd demand it, like a dashboard cam. It could prove your innocence in so many different situations. The dystopian breakdown would be that when judges would review it to assess your guilt, and it wouldn't violate your Fifth Amendment rights because they could subpoena the I-Corp directly, just one of several ethical implications raised in this movie. But no, if you've got an implant, it's a huge investment. There's no way the only point at which it comes into play is after your death. Side note, the society envisioned in the final cut anticipates a feature-length movie flung together from years of raw footage instantaneously. The processing is supported by a powerful computer, but I can promise you, as a person with some editing experience, we are talking about no one is ever wearing the right thing. The lighting is almost always wrong. There are long stretches of nothing going on, and even to locate, just say, the top 50 highlights from any person's life and to cut them together and maintain any sense of storyline, that is point many zeros 152 of anyone's life, and oh yeah, completely redundant. I mean, that's the other thing. We are surrounded in just today's universe, never mind 50 plus years from now, with cheap, ubiquitous cameras. Instant footage posted everywhere. We are documented. Our lives are documented. Our experiences are shared ad absurdum now. I mean, I hear you saying, this was 2004. Social media wasn't really a thing. And I reply that as we go back in time, funerals had lesser and lesser media components. And yeah, most of today's funerals, most of the ones I've been to recently, have tended to be photo heavy, but more and more they include screens cutting together photos and music and video, and just from any one family's personal media collection, you can build a decent remembrance for a family member. So sitting through just even a couple hours culled together from years of the disorienting, shaky, the only time you see the person themselves is in a mirror, and they're never focused on what you want them to be, easily distracted by shiny and puppy and food, even boiled down just to the significant moments of a person's life. Just physiologically, people are never looking where they should be. They look up, they look away, they look out the window. Oh, I'm at my daughter's wedding, but oh look, my phone. So anyone's rememory would end up just being very expensive, very hastily slapped together, and as jumpy and disjointed as Pee-wee's Playhouse. But as for the show itself, now, that's something entirely different. You've got Robin Williams completely at home as a dramatic actor, effortlessly finding his voice in darker roles. In this production, he weighs a lifetime of guilt, no longer even seeking redemption, accepting his burden as a sin-eater, spiritually responsible for the wrongdoings of others. Alan Hackman cuts together lives no one else wants to, the lives of the guilty, the unforgiven. Fletcher says he takes the lives of these sinners and makes them into saints. I'd argue there's probably enough footage in any of our lives to paint us as hero or villain. Being CEO of I just gave Bannister a larger stage. Also, I think it's probably a rare funeral where someone has cut a video together to feature the worst aspects of a person's life, so Fletcher's accusation of Alan doesn't make a ton of sense. The central event of a rememory service the family is paying for is likely going to downplay, just for one example, the guy's pedophilia. Justice is still available. Post the funeral, the family can still find out stuff and get help for the children. It's not like the footage vanishes. In episode 10, I suggested that this show, The Final Cut, was significant to me as I worked through this collection. And it kind of is. A podcaster I gave a shout out to in episode 26, David Hooper, he does the Build a Big podcast, recently suggested one strategy for finding and building our audiences includes identifying an enemy. Weight loss podcasts can fight weight gain, for instance. Political podcasters will identify their own enemies to the left or the right. And I thought about this, and my little podcast isn't specifically going to have an enemy per se, but I am seeking to fight disorder and loss. I had a giant collection of tapes I could access pretty easily once upon a time. If there was a recording I wanted to see, 9 times out of 10 I could find it. That's not available now. I've been doing this for a year, really on some level for more than a decade, and still have thousands of uncatalogued discs with no way of easily finding any specific recording. So my enemy is chaos, disorder, the unknown, and I, intrepid warrior, armed with initiative, drive, and a couple of powerful online resources in IMDb and TV.com, will continue plowing through this collection, discovering what I've managed to collect while collecting other shows I love, so when I'm old and gray and all they've got on the TV these days is ads and crap or expensive subscriptions, who can afford them? I want to watch something, I can throw in a Tori Amos concert or Fawlty Towers, or maybe I'll finally watch that copy of A History of Violence on disc X35 or Interstellar from disc 156 or some other thing that I'll still somehow have never seen yet. So yeah, it's not a perfect analog to all my goals with this project, but The Final Cut, its narrative focus of accumulating and recording life experiences, explores a world that values archiving, remembering, celebrating human experience. True, the dramatic energy of the show derives from a darker, more sinister space within that priority, but I can certainly understand and support the underpinnings of this world. If my enemy is forgetfulness, the fragmentation and gradual loss of experience, I can certainly understand wanting to record, to archive, to remember.
Diving into the classic collection.
Not that I'd need a lot more than that to comment on, but nothing really stood out about my classic VHS DVD collection this time. I encountered the first season finale of Criminal Minds, which featured the members of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Washington targeted by a murderous kidnapper who draws them into some outrageously clever quest that involves their tech's online role-playing and, in one scene, a puzzle organized around a dead body that in part involved hiding a clue indicated by where the shadow fell on a wall, and ooh, he had so much access to the details of the agents' personal lives, and wow, all this was so hopelessly contrived. I do not know how I didn't reject it out of hand, but nope, I guess I was still going along for that ride. I also encountered episodes from Eli Stone on ABC, which was getting disappointing, and Terminal City on the Sundance Channel, which was still crackling along with its own understated energy. A couple of revisits from earlier discussion, I ran into the Nip Tuck Season 4 episode where Matt meets up with Kimber randomly at a gym, so that's where that arc got underway. And I ran into the Doctor Who episode Blink by Stephen Moffat I talked about in episode 9 with the Weeping Angels and the girl sent back in time from 2007, incidentally not from 2012. But yeah, basically thereabouts. The Angels would still have had to figure out where exactly the planet was decades earlier for her to have landed up there, and exactly there, by the way, not materializing 50 feet in the air or deep inside the Earth's crust, either eventuality possible if she'd shown up there, say, 10 seconds earlier or later, or a few minutes later and she'd have materialized in outer space. Then there was the Hot Girl episode in that quintessentially CBS Jerry Bruckheimer production Close to Home, where Okay, so there's this creepy guy online targeting teenage girls. So some high school girl gets it into her head to lure the predator to a hotel where things quickly get out of hand, and she calls her friend or something to come quick, come save her. And he drives over there and they shoot the guy. But they're spotted fleeing the scene and get tracked down by the police. Oh, this world we live in today. Who's right, who's wrong? It's all up to beautiful blonde hometown prosecutor Annabeth Chase to get to the bottom of this. I swear at one point in the interrogation scene, the boyfriend or whatever said she met him on FaceSpace, and the investigators, it's FaceSpace? Oh, all these teenagers today with their hotel rooms and their sex predators and their FaceSpacers. Oh, Ted, I'll stay close. Yeah, it's my fault for recording it, but on the bright side, it sure is a fun show to make fun of.
Current collection.
And now the milestone I mentioned up there, I have finally caught up with my current collection. Yep, from when I started recording shows directly to DVD back in, it looks like it was probably January of 2017, I have had a long lag time between recording and cataloging. It took until episode 18 of this podcast, recorded in January of this year, actually, to catch up to where I began cataloging episodes I'd been talking about in what I've been watching at the beginning of this podcast. That is, by the time VideoFuzzy went live last June, I'd already compiled a backlog of more than 80 discs in my current collection. It took until January of this year for my cataloging to catch up with that archiving effort, and then it took until this past week or so to catalog my entire current archive, nearly 170 discs altogether. But more on that later. It took a year, but as of this episode, my current collection and what I've been watching are now more or less the same segment. So what have I been watching? Oh, things, stuff. Melissa McCarthy being hilariously badass in the FX presentation of Spy from 2015. The second season finale of Brockmire on IFC, where Hank Azaria's out-of-control baseball commentator Jim Brockmire has entered rehab and cleaned up his life enough, maybe for another baseball franchise to take another chance on him. At the same time, his former podcast producer, Charles, has hit a seriously bad patch in his personal life. It'll be interesting seeing where they go with that. Oh, and I tracked the second season finale of Legion, which I talked about in episode 29. Lordy, does that feel like a lifetime ago at this point, but which I intend to revisit shortly. That finale deserved a little more reflection than I gave it. AMC's Preacher has been turning in some dark and deeply twisted episodes focused on where Tulip had died and Jesse had gotten his voodoo granny to bring her back to life, but now he's got to figure out a way to get out of her debt, and also, as of this past week, to spring Cassidy from the tombs. Another one that feels like a lifetime ago, I tracked down the third episode of Supernatural's season 13, not fourth as I had said, titled Patience, which introduced us to a psychic and fleshed out Jack's personal history a bit more. Sam showed him the video his mother taped for him before she died. I streamed that one in on Amazon since I didn't seem to have access to it through on-demand. There are a couple of channels that Midco doesn't seem to have on-demand access to, and the CW is one of them, along with BBC America and FX. I'm pretty sure there is an app, but I do not enjoy watching TV through the internet. It's not even a matter of ads or buffering, although those both enter into it. I can't easily archive anything that comes in via streaming, and it's of decidedly reduced quality when I try. When I discovered I could still access episode 11 from the first season of NBC's Trial and Error, I leapt at that opportunity. I mentioned in episode 13 having homeburned that episode, but the copy I've got from the on-demand version is just so much better, even if I did have to sit through some ads. Then I had a new adventure with some home-burning streaming last weekend. I saw where Comedy Central was airing the final 3 episodes of season 19 of South Park, which highlighted the plight of commercial television in a universe of DVRs and fast-forwarding commercials. Excellent episodes, and then things got a little bit meta. I'd caught a good chunk of the season 16 episode, A Cause for Applause, where everyone found out that Christ had used performance-enhancing drugs to perform his miracles, so they don't want to wear his What Would Jesus Do wristband or SCAs anymore. Stan does, though. We meet the Dr. Seuss-themed SCAs maker, whose secret evil plan is to sell people SCAs until there's no money left before moving on to the next town. Well, my recording cut off the last 5 minutes of this episode, and there's actually quite a lot of payoff in those minutes, including the SCAs maker wringing the last cent out of South Park and Christ roid-raging the SCAs maker. Well, damn. I looked to see if they were rerunning the episode anywhere. It did not look like it. I should have checked Comedy Central, which appears to have every episode streamable through Hulu. I haven't used Hulu in a while, but I wasn't sure I'd been able to just click to the end of the episode, which is all I needed. I will say everywhere else I looked, the only access available to the last 5 minutes of that episode seems to be through a paywall, so I gave YouTube $2 and clicked to the end. I homeburned the stream to my phone, processed it through Nero, and recorded it to disk X163 right after the episode I'd recorded from my DVR. This one there was a decided drop in quality from the one recording to the other, and between you, me, and your podcast provider, I'm not sure I'm ever going to need to see it again, but I am glad to have it in case I ever want to. South Park is a show like The Simpsons and The Family Guy that I haven't really been keeping up with. I'll see an episode here and there, and they're entertaining, but after 2 and nearly 3 decades, my attention wanders. Initially, I didn't know what to think about the AMC production of Dietland, but I feel like it's been tracking a solid path. I absolutely relate to some of the stuff Joy Nash's central character Plum Kettle has been going through, though clearly not all of it. Until recently, she's been a plus-sized writer for a teen beauty magazine aspiring to physical perfection, but beset on all sides by some high-profile weirdness, including a masked terrorist operation codenamed Jennifer, a body image cult called Calliope House run by the poster child for a former Baptist weight loss liturgy. Then there's a magazine she was fired from, a relentless drumbeat, or rather cattle prod in worship of body image perfection. Her boss, Kitty, played by Juliana Margulies, assigned her to cover a fashion show for plus-sized models, but only via webcam, since the magazine has a strict image to maintain. At the end of episode 7, Monster High, Plum sent an email to all the girls who wrote into her at the magazine, Kitty's girls as they're called, and revealed that she was fat. In her words, a callback to Network from 1976. I'm fat as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. Anyway, following the young woman's suicide bombing of a football locker room at the top of that episode, the terrorist group Jennifer named its top targets for social disruption, the Penis 100, naming them the 100 worst men in the world. The terrorist group Jennifer decreed that henceforth no woman will have sex with them, and there would be consequences for any woman who did. As Plum described it at the top of the show, it was Lysistrata for the modern age, and paused to give us a chance to look that up. Well, no need, as the following description was flashed momentarily on the screen. Lysistrata is a comedy by Aristophanes. Originally performed in classical Athens in 41 BC, is a comic account of a woman's extraordinary mission to end the Peloponnesian War by denying all the men of the land any sex. Lysistrata persuades the women of Greece to withhold sexual privileges from their husbands and lovers as a means of forcing the men to negotiate peace, a strategy, however, that inflames a battle of the sexes. The play is notable for being an early expose of sexual relations in a male-dominated society. One especially troubling scene in the show that has not shied away from them was Jack, a guy Plum had decided to give a second chance. He'd met up with her for dinner, and they were having a nice first date when she went to use the washroom and came back, and he ducked out, leaving her a note. However, he'd called a few times, apologized again, and after Calliope House had given her some blowback from a live television interview, Plum was in the mood to give him a second chance, if only to vent. They go out, they have a nice time, and he brings her back to his place, and this has not been Plum's experience with dates. They have tended to not go this well, although earlier in the season I think she had said something about being fetishized as a larger woman, and the complaint from those encounters was that they were only into her body fat, that they weren't interested in her as a person, which anyone could sympathize is not a good basis for a relationship. Well, Things are getting physical. He goes too far and backs off when she tells him to, then starts kissing her down her body. She's not comfortable with that. She doesn't like it, and she says so. Then, after a short pause, he shoves her up against a bookshelf and, over her protests and complete lack of assent, assaults her sexually. This was important. It was important that we witnessed this assault to understand it. No screaming, no repeatedly crying out, no. Jack doesn't feel like he's a rapist. He positions himself with her back to him so he's not dealing with her facial expressions, and he can imagine that in the heat of his assault that maybe it's consensual, but it's not. She'd been okay with some of the touching and the kissing leading up to the rape, but she had not consented, so we needed to understand that. Even if she's not screaming and crying and fighting him off, it's rape. That's a way that rape looks, and Dietland portrayed it so that we can see. It wasn't her fault for going to his room. It wasn't her fault for craving some intimacy. It was his fault for taking more than she was comfortable giving. Throughout watching it, I was thinking, dude, she's mostly liking you after humiliating her a few days ago. She'd been having a genuinely nice time. I'd enjoy the makeout session and let her set the pace of this. When he just kept pushing things further and further, it was another illustration of a situation probably lots of women unfortunately are familiar with, which was why this scene in this show was a good inclusion. Not just conventionally beautiful women, not always darkened storage lockers and back alleyways, not even always evil, awful, creepy strangers. It doesn't always look or sound like it, but sex without consent is rape. That's a point I needed to revisit from 1,000 years ago now when I watched the second season finale of Legion. After Melanie spent the entire episode prior to that poisoning Sid's mind against David, showing her nothing but the worst of him, she confronts him at gunpoint and demands that he account for himself. He wasn't prepared for this, so even though they were in a power-dampening field, however that worked, he snuck into her mind and made her forget all the bad things Melanie had showed her. Then, later, back at Division 3, he snuck into her room through her mind and had mind control sex with her. Now, I was distracted at exactly this point by a mouse Farouk sent to take over the minds of everyone else, mainly because I could not understand with the stakes as high as they were why David would sneak in and mind rape Sydney, which, anyway, of course it looked consensual. He was manipulating her memories, but yeah, David's personal obliviousness to the outrageousness of his actions in this situation, fighting against what his brain was presenting as a delusion in and of itself, to wit, that he was a good person deserving of love, through to the discovery of his treachery and trial and subsequent jailbreak. As innocent and blameless as David might feel himself to be, that is part of this. That is part of his actions. And David might be the hero in his own story, but no, he is not a good person. And my thanks to Jason and Rena of the Legion Cast podcast and to Matt and John at the Damn That Television podcast for the redirect. Then, in other viewing, I encountered another one of those blink and you'll miss it things on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. He was doing another one of his 2018 midterm profiles and discourage things on a candidate for governor of Massachusetts, Scott Lively, who wrote a book called The Pink Swastika, claiming that gay people were ruining the Nazi Party. This was some especially tortured logic since the Nazis rounded up and killed millions of gay people, but host Stephen Colbert seized on this and added it to the big board, things people blame on gays. This was on screen for all of 2 seconds, so if you looked away and missed it, these were the other things people blame on gays. They include terrorism, Solo's performance, the end of Lost, pink eye, hurricanes, earthquakes, ruining Thanksgiving, LeBron's performance, and now, Nazis. I know it was June, but happy Pride Month, everyone. Speaking of Pride Month, I think Pose aired its season finale this weekend. I won't be able to watch it for a few days because I'll be busy editing this hot mess together, but in the run-up, Elektra's lover, Dick Ford, played by Christopher Maloney, kicked her to the curb after she had achieved her dream of transformation, got the surgery, and became a post-operative transsexual woman. He'd warned her he was only into her as long as she remained intact, and after many years of this arrangement, he'd kicked her to the curb. Meanwhile, she'd spent all of the money he gave her plus the money they'd stolen from the Salvation Army a few episodes ago to get the surgery. The rent was due and they'd gotten evicted. Her house rebelled against her. Candy and Lulu determined to form their own house, the House of Ferocity, bringing in the other scattered remnants of Elektra's House of Abundance, as well as Blanca, Mother Evangelista's cast-off Papi, who she'd kicked out because he'd continued to deal drugs, which was against house rules. Meanwhile, Elektra's bid to reconcile with Ford went nowhere. She found herself on the streets with no prospects, so turned up working a window at Angel's Peep Show. Aye, the drama heading into this finale. Truly looking forward to it. Trying to keep an eye on things this season, I grabbed a couple of political ads back and forth, mainly between incumbent Senator Heidi Heitkamp and Representative Kevin Kramer. I guess I'd appreciate hearing from the House candidates some as well. I think that's Max Schneider and Kelly Armstrong, but it seems that most of the out-of-state money is focused on the Senate race, so that's the one we're hearing about the most. Wherever you're hearing this, if you're in America, you've got at least a House election going on, so take the trouble to track down who's running, and if you can manage it, see whose track record and voting history most closely align with your interests. Everyone's rhetoric sounds exactly the same, and you can reduce the potential for candidates talking a good game but doing whatever they feel like once they get in if you check out how they've actually voted before. PBS has been dropping the ball some of late, along with a biography of Jackson Pollock that aired with no audio whatsoever. I caught a concert by rock group Foreigner on PBS called Foreigner Live at the Symphony, which started out absolutely fantastic, but soon began suffering from recording or transmission issues. Impossible to know, but more and more as the concert continued, the screen would blink out, sound would blink out, we'd have garbled audio. While the group was in great sound and voice that evening and the orchestra was phenomenal, that performance was ultimately quite a disappointment. This past week saw the premiere of the second season of Trial and Error, featuring Kristen Chenoweth as Lavinia Peck Foster, the First Lady of East Peck, South Carolina, accused of murdering her tiny husband, perhaps by assault via gold-plated cane, perhaps by drowning, during the biggest gala event in East Peck, and no one noticed until she was arrested hours later, driving 95 in a 30, and a busted taillight popped the trunk on her rolls, and there was her husband stuffed in a suitcase.
Just put it in the warning.
She is delightful. 2 episodes in, she has sung, vamped, trilled. Kristen Chenoweth has deployed a considerable range of talents, and we know with her she's got plenty more where that came from. Her lawyer is Nicholas DeGasto as Josh Siegel, teamed up with Stephen Boyer as Dwayne Reed. Pardon me, his last name is a scatological reference in East Peck, and Sherry Shepard as Anne Flatch, who, her first appearance on screen, launched several feet in the air when startled as part of a rare condition she suffers called jumping Frenchman from Maine. It's actually quite common if you're a Frenchman and from Maine. This season finds Josh newly situated in East Peck, stunned to discover a very pregnant DA, Carol Ann Keene, played by Jamie Mays, and facing an absolutely unintelligible judge, Joel McCurry as Judge Alexander Cameltoe. They just don't hear it. Constrained by new laws and lifeways in the town we are discovering has lady laws, such as one woman can't sit in judgment over another, and can't drive a car without she's preceded by a man waving red flags shouting, "Lady driver!" Fun little quirks like that. Along with small-town Southerners, this season is poking fun at some true crime blogs. We've met Amanda Payton as Nina Rudolph, the podcaster covering the trial on M-Town, where murder happens, which I only just while putting this together discovered they're actually doing for realsies, and I am totally subscribing. But yeah, the second season of Trial and Error is off to a fantastic start. Finally, on BBC America, I saw where they were airing a lost episode of Doctor Who, a Tom Baker production dated to 1980 titled Shada, named for a prison planet engineered by the Time Lords. A doddering old professor, Professor Chronitus, is a retired Time Lord living now at Cambridge, who has maintained a secret working TARDIS disguised as a combination office, study, library, and sitting room with a kitchen ensuite. He has also filched an artifact, a history of the Time Lords penned by Lord Rassilon himself, which could prove dangerous if in the wrong hand, so naturally that's the first place it falls. A young associate takes it and wanders off with it just before a strange, rather fabulous spaceman comes looking for it, seeking to use it to control the minds of everyone in the universe. And the Doctor, played by 4th Doctor Tom Baker, teamed at this point in the storytelling with Lalla Ward as the second regeneration we meet of Time Lady Romana Devratinalenda seeks to retrieve it and get it back to Gallifrey. There are cloaked spaceships, mind control spheres, and endless running around that, since we're just animating missing scenes anyway, maybe condense the production further into just the salient bits, which, by my estimate, would result in a running time of maybe about 1 hour rather than 3. Well, the production was penned by Douglas Adams, of course, which makes it worth tracking down in the first place. And then there's a contemporary cameo by Tom Baker as a very old man, once again in the control room of the TARDIS, which was clearly filmed quite recently, so that was a fun inclusion. Not sure it's worth much in the scheme of things, but it renewed my thinking, not for the first time, that it wouldn't be the worst set of adventures for Jodie Whittaker as 13 to take on, following up with side characters and repercussions from past adventures and exploring the history of this series and character, not least of which, potentially, her daughter.
What I've been watching.
So despite having caught up with my current collection, I find that I still need to split out what I've been watching as a separate segment, mainly to talk about stuff that I am seeing but not archiving. In the month since my last installment, yep, I realize it has absolutely been that long, I mentioned Ralph and I had taken in a few shows. We caught the Medora musical a few weeks ago, which we've seen 3 times now. The first couple times featured a central character named Queen of the West. This season that role was taken by a guy, Cowboy Chet Wallen, which just... The show wasn't anything like disappointing. These talented singers and dancers put on a fantastic show. But the energy of the production shifts a little. The Queen of the West had served as something of a foil to the antics of Wild Bill Sorensen. Now, they also lost a longtime production member, Fred Smith, near the beginning of this season, and so had dedicated the season's performances to his memory. But in a production helmed by 2 dudes, all the musicians are dudes, half the singers and dancers are dudes, and the energy is off just a little bit from past productions, and it might not be the worst idea in the world to make sure there's more female energy in the production. Craft a feisty Medora de Mores character or something to achieve a stronger balance. And this past weekend I managed to take in the Capitol Shakespeare production of Richard III. The cast did a great job with this show, which came in at about 2.5 hours. It didn't fly by, but they did a good job with it. In the production, which closed Sunday, Austin Flemmer as Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, conspired with Chad Lytton as the Duke of Buckingham to clear, by way of murder and deceit, his path to England's throne. Along the way, he seeks to wed Lady Anne, played by Brittany Bearsheart, and the daughter of Queen Elizabeth, played by Moira McNichols, who confronts him with a withering rebuke at his Machiavellian thirst for power. An evening of fitful dreams, peopled by the many characters killed at his command, launches him fatally into the battle with Richmond, who weds the Lady Elizabeth, thus ending the War of the Roses. There was an attempt to update the costuming and set the production during World War I, which mostly worked, though some of the uniforms came off as Usher at the Movie House. But despite some difficulty with the dialogue here and there, it was a fantastic show, really showcased some talented acting and storytelling. The production Ralph and I took in while visiting my friend from college, Nathan Irwin, in Peoria, however, that was astonishing. A few weeks ago, we were able to road trip to Illinois, and while there, Nathan treated us to a production of Shakespeare's The Merry Wives of Windsor in nearby Normal, Illinois. Housed in the Ewing Theater, which is essentially a Shakespeare cathedral housing the Illinois Shakespeare Festival, this was updated even further, set 40 years ago this month, July of 1978, which, as a bit of trivia, marked the opening production in that space with Twelfth Night. Very cool. Mistress Page and Mistress Ford play the title wives and are horrified to receive suit from Sir John Falstaff, who is very naughty, and as punishment they conspire to humiliate him by tipping him to the river and dressing him up as a belly dancer and use him as a distraction by which Mistress Page's daughter may wed her true love rather than the wet noodle her father has arranged for her. The farcical comedy is driven by misdirection and misunderstanding and hilarious servants, all muddling forward to happy endings. For anyone interested, I would absolutely recommend it. The Merry Wives of Windsor runs through August 9th, and if that one was any indication, their production of Henry V will be worth it. That runs through August 10th. There's one production remaining of improvised Shakespeare on August 8th at the CPA Theatre, and productions of Shakespeare in Love running through August 11th. All this information you can find on illinoisshakes.com, and I'll include a link in my show notes. Video out. Mainly, I was thrilled to reconnect with Nathan, who just got married this past May, and we were not able to get down there for that. But as he said, the weekend of his wedding, he'd have had just about zero time to relax and hang out, so this was a great time to do that. For one thing, it gave me a chance to chat with him a bit about my connection with media, and together we were able to throw open a window on some of my earliest recording efforts. Nathan?
You're Nathan Irwin.
I'm Nathan Irwin. We were roommates in college.
Mm-hmm. And you've actually been on VideoFuzzy for a while now because you're one of the voices in my crowdsourcing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. What was that, like 6 months ago? A year ago?
Quite a while. I've been using that since the second episode, and I've appreciated having it available.
Well, you asked the right guy. I remember getting that email or text message, and you were asking people to record stuff, and I think I made the comment that, at least in my case, you could hardly have picked someone for whom that would be less of an inconvenience, given that there's a recording studio 50 feet from my office.
Yeah, you've been program director at WCBU in Peoria here,
Yep.
And actually I thought that while I was on a road trip that it would be really cool to talk a little bit about some of the my own media history, because as I've commented on the VideoFuzzy before, I've actually got started recording video at the Honors House at UND in about 1989, probably, I think, because MTV was starting to, at about 10:30, right around then, they would have, Monty Python. They'd have their own, little, produced bumper at the beginning saying, this is a British program of people being funny. If it offends you, don't watch. And then we would all, there was a group of us, I think there's probably a half dozen people or so when that came on.
Right. I remember that very distinctly, that for whatever reason, there was a group of us at the Honors House that we sort of migrated and took to Monty Python, and I mean, this was obviously at least 20, if not 30 years ago, so my memories aren't super clear, but I remember that was just sort of a thing that we all did, that there was a certain time in the evening, if you were still in the Honors House at 10 or 10:30, you either left or you just joined the group of people who was watching Monty Python.
A show that at that time was already about 20 years old.
Yeah.
Because I think it was 70s.
Right. And obviously, this was all reruns of the old BBC stuff. I vaguely remember that I may have seen an episode or two on public television, because some public television stations used to run it. But this was certainly the first time I ever discovered Monty Python, and I was one of those people who just took to it. I got the humor, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen on American TV. The closest analogy would probably have been Saturday Night Live, and Monty Python was just another level.
Well, all of them, I think, were a doctorate, or I mean, they were all advanced. They had advanced degrees. They all came to the comedy with okay, we're doing a little bit more than just like writers in a room. We're like trying to bring history and art and philosophy into our discussion. I mean, you have a song that I think, well, most of the songs were done by Eric Idle, where you've actually got somebody singing a drinking song about
Philosophers, yeah. Yeah.
That is nothing that Dan Aykroyd or Belushi would ever doing.
And and again, it's been so long ago now. I don't even remember the details. Was it every night, or was it just Saturdays and possibly Sundays, or was it every weekday?
I think it must have been like on a fairly regular basis, like maybe a Monday through Thursday type thing on MTV.
Yeah,
because MTV was still showing music videos for some reason.
Can you imagine?
I can't. So
yeah, and I just remember that was. That was a thing. I distinctly remember you and I watching it. Possibly Kurt was one of those. Maybe Jay Jurdy, if you remember him, or maybe Mark Mason was one of the crew.
It feels like for like there was a good group for a good amount, like just like a really, while they were doing it, because I know they stopped at some point. I was just devastated because I was. At that point, I had the presence of mind to actually start trying to record some of these things.
Right.
And while I was recording them, I don't think it was MTV, but something was also showing "Are You Being Served?" Another like British programming, which is like the British, pretty much the programming equivalent of Three's Company for the level of like writing and sophistication on it. But,
well, and one thing that I don't know if you've talked about this on the podcast, but when you and I were in the honors program at UND, it was set up physically in an unusual way in that the academic program was located in a residential house. And one of the other things, that because it was a house, there was always a resident in the house who was a student. One student would get picked every semester or every year to be the resident. And like I was the resident for about 8 months, and I think you were the resident right after me. So the reason you could have a group of students around at 10 o'clock at night watching TV was because we were in a house that somebody lived in. There was a living room with a television. And because you and I were both residents at various times, we had free access to the house.
Oh, yeah.
And the house would be open until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And then, and then it was the resident would throw everybody out. Unless you happened to live there, in which case. So, we had access to this whenever we wanted it. And
which it made it, I mean, so yeah, I had a tape that I'd gotten through, and then when I had reached the end of the tape, I would start recording again from the beginning. So I actually had right about the time MTV had decided that it was going to cancel the show, that with absolutely no warning at all. I had said, oh, okay, well, what I want to do is get this whole tape to be Monty Python. And so I started from the beginning, I was recording the shows, and then all of a sudden it stopped.
Like a week
later.
I
was like, oh, God, that's terrible. And so I had this tape that was sort of Monty Python, but also sort of other things too on it. And it never occurred to me to get another tape, and I don't know what was involved with that.
Yeah.
Because I had one that it was they had the little sticky letters that would come with the, and so I would have Monty Python spelled out in stickers, and it's just absolutely not necessary.
Well, and what I remember
on it
is that because we watched it so often. And there's only a relatively small amount of Monty Python relative to the amount of, say, Game of Thrones. That we got to a certain point, early on, anytime we were able to tune in, and they would be showing a random episode, it would probably be an episode that we hadn't seen before. So this is all this is a new experience. But after about 6 months. We would still tune in, but you're 30 seconds in, and you're like, oh, it's this one. This is the one that involves the lumberjack sketch, or this is the one that has.
The department store one, which was weird. It was one of their later episodes.
Yeah, or I'm here for an argument sketch.
Oh, God, I love that sketch.
And by the end of it, we were sort of kids with Saturday morning cartoons that like even though you've seen it before, you watch it anyway because you enjoy it so much.
Well, it's
But
so subversive. I mean, the writing
yeah,
itself was like, as you mentioned, it's like nothing we had seen on in terms of comedy in American television. It's just like, it really was its own creation. Now, Kids in the Hall was something that Laura Michaels was putting together, like I think in the late '80s.
yeah, probably around that time.
David Foley was starting to be a thing. Kevin Nelson, I think, and it's Bruce McCall. All those guys were wonderful, and I think like as Monty Python stopped, or like they stopped airing it, or like it started cycling back into things, I started to see more Kids in the Hall. So I was introduced to that probably late '80s, early '90s. I was like really enjoying that, but I don't think it was in syndication yet. I think that some of those things were still new.
Yeah, I know that there was a point where Kids in the Hall was a thing, and people knew about it, and I had heard about it, but I hadn't seen it anyplace. And I distinctly remember that I finally discovered it about 5 years later, so probably in the mid '90s in Grand Forks. In fact, maybe even more closer to like '96, '97, because I know I was living on my own at the time, and and I continued to have roommates for quite a while until I finally had a job and could afford my own place. And that's when I discovered Kids in the Hall, and it was already in syndication, which means that it was over.
Oh, that would have
as
been
new
because,
content.
yeah, David Foley had started to be on news radio, and he had his own show and
Yeah.
some stuff that going on. So this project was in the past, but it was still fun because it was along Python lines. I think it was written, even though it was produced by the same guy behind Saturday Night Live. I think that it had its comic roots in like more of the British tradition, because being a Canadian production,
Right.
and because they were doing like these introspective characters. They weren't afraid to do stuff that was not gonna get a belly laugh, but was gonna kind of make you go, Bruce
Yeah.
McCullough would do these like really ethereal characters, and more Mark McKinney would do like these really
Yeah.
weird characters that you would get you'd see that again with Trevor somebody in The Whitest Kids You Know, but I mean that's like an IFC comedy that came like well into the 2000s, and it's like, so we're drawing like comedies from comedies from comedies, but
Well, yeah, but of course that's how television works, and really sort of any form of entertainment is you come up with a formula, and then people continue to riff on the formula, doing their own thing with it. Now that we're talking about Monty Python, which I haven't thought about in quite a while, it occurs to me that in a lot of ways, I think Monty Python, one of the things that they're drawing on is sort of that improv comedy style. The classic where one character is out there and establishes a premise like, boy, it's sure awful when you're waiting for your bus and it starts raining, and then someone else comes in and puts a spin on that or takes it in a new direction. And then the whole purpose of the scene is to build that to a logical climax and hopefully be funny as you go along. But I think getting back to something you said earlier, what made Monty Python so unique is that they were so willing to make fun of anybody and also be utterly ridiculous. Which I think is something that you don't see nearly as much of in American comedy. And I also think the Monty Python folks weren't afraid if something wasn't particularly funny. They would just do it anyway. I think of things like there was a courtroom sketch in which there's a dead body, and somehow Cardinal Richelieu gets called as a witness. Saturday Night Live just wouldn't do that. They might have a courtroom sketch in which somebody brings in a coffin and they try to depose the corpse. I can see an American group of writers doing that, but
they
wouldn't take it to that next level.
and they couldn't like build it around it. I mean, that would be like a thing that happened, and it was like a one-off. But
Yeah.
like, oh, you're dead. Yeah, bring on the girl with the biggest tits or something.
Or
was
yeah,
also
like
Python.
there's also the bit that it's the award ceremony at a private school, and people keep hijacking the role of MC, and like at one point, there's the MC who's presenting the awards, and the award for best Latin essay goes to this kid, and the award for such and so goes to the other kid, and then someone else, like a thief, breaks in and takes over his role and says, "Oh, here's the golden cup for the outstanding student athlete, and it goes in my sack."
That was fun. And I think one award went to the People's Republic of China.
Yeah.
Oh, and then they had the whole sketch show, the Proust Uprising contest that ended with a madrigal.
And again, you as much as and being the age that I am, my first kind of exposure to sort of a sketch comedy was early when it was Saturday Night Live, and I mean they would just never do that. They would. Saturday Night Live they're happy to do a sketch or build a character out of like, hey, let's do a sketch about that, that annoying guy that there's one of in every single office, or
the pathological liar.
The pathological liar
John
guy.
Levitt's got a lot of mileage out of it.
But it's just, so they'll come up with a premise, but it's always, like relative to something like a Monty Python, the premise is what it is, and it's about how much fun you can have with that and how much mileage you can get out of it. What it misses is that sort of extra layer of just silliness that at least in Monty Python, I think is the source of a lot of their comedy.
Also, it stands out as like, okay, this works, so let's run it into the ground, like the literally couple, or the copier guy. And you take something that's like, okay, that worked, that was a great like sketch, but then it recurs. And it just becomes, the Roxbury guys. I mean, that became a friggin' movie.
The ones that I could never stand were the Pep Squad, Cheer Squad couple who were just relentlessly happy. But once you've seen one of their sketches, you've seen every sketch.
Yeah, like the entire potential has like really just been demonstrated.
Yeah.
It's like, whereas Monty Python would say, "Oh, that was a great sketch. What else have we come up with?" Like, they brought the Gumbies back. I think it was only one of the few things that recurred.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because that's recognizable as them in the opening sequence with the guy. But I mean, that was the opening sequence, and after he's done, he's passed, and the rest of the show is happening. And
how weird is it that there's this whole opening sequence, none of which has anything to do with the contents of the program, and it's just a sequence of weird animations.
And now for something completely different.
Yeah.
So if I got the sense that for Python, where the actors were also the writers. There's like some of that improvisational energy that came from the writer's room and spilled out onto the stage that made a little more magic happen, whereas Saturday Night Live, it's clear demarcation between like writers and the actors, and sometimes a writer would become an actor. Like I think Tina Fey was one of those, and Amy Poehler, especially when they became the Weekend Update people, that worked, and they brought a different energy to their presentation than like if you were just an actor, then your first access to this to these ideas and these sketches were at the reading table. Like you'd come in, you'd read it, and then you'd like prep it for the week, but you weren't involved in the writing of it. So.
Yeah, and of course, we should say that Saturday Night Live has the. First of all, they've got the challenge of, even now, I think they need to crank out more episodes in a year than Monty Python ever did.
Oh yeah,
and they've got the challenge of only having 4 days to put the whole thing together, and they have to do that every week. Whereas the Monty Python, I don't know what their seasons were, but were their seasons 12, 30-minute episodes, and and they had the time and they had the budget that they could physically go to a location outside of a city if they wanted to. Like if they wanted to shoot a sequence on a beach, they could do that. Or if they wanted to drive around and shoot that, they could do that, and then they could bring everything back and put it together in the studio.
I think that's a fair assessment. Or British seasons of things are like you get you do a 6 and then you're picked up for another 6 or something.
Right.
Whereas in the U.S., your season runs the year and you have the same writers. Probably you have the same actors for the season and. Yeah, as I think reference that the seasons are shorter, so the projects are shorter, and people are free to be involved in other projects then because their commitment to any given storyline is limited, and the BBC has got an interest in producing a range of programming for like all of Great Britain and the world. So it's kind of fun to watch the kind of creativity you get in a situation where it's not like U.S. till very recently. Well, I would say very recently, probably about 20 years ago, it started really splintering. But you had network television, which was like the be all and end all, and then you had like maybe some side cable projects. Well, the cable ascended in as more money and better programming started appearing on the channels like AMC and TNT and FX and that kind of stuff.
Right, and now we've sort of seen the apotheosis of that with the where the real prestige projects are happening on like streaming platforms.
Premium, because they have all of our money. Because that's where people are. I mean, say, okay, I want to subscribe to something, and I want good programming. So, okay, for this amount of money, you'll get this programming, so they can commit to like House of Cards and different Showtime productions and different HBO productions. That Homeland is one that I think. Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, I want to say. Well, one of them is doing one that's like almost just cable base. I think that Amazon has a channel, and I've never seen anything on there. But that's like that is a universe that I haven't decided to explore yet. You're a subscriber to Netflix,
yeah.
So.
Well, and it's interesting. You were talking about how we get in these new models. We tend to get better programming, and if you'll indulge me for a moment to sort of play a pedantic card, because I know a thing or two about broadcasting and programming. There's actually there's a reason for that, and that's because back in the days when all of us only had over the air television and there were only 3 channels, in order to stay on the air and stay profitable, the networks had to program for the widest possible audience. You had ABC, NBC, even though they're one of them may lean a little more in the direction of sitcoms, one may lean a little more in the direction of say westerns for a couple of years. They all basically had to compete for every viewer, and so that led to a lot of homogeny on programming. Everybody had a morning news program like Good Morning America or The Today Show. And then when that was done, they would cut over to their game shows or their soap operas. And then from that, they would go into cartoons and then the evening news and then, the primetime programming. Once cable comes along, the cable companies realized early on that if you're going to do just one style of programming, sports or news or travel or whatever, you end up not having... You're no longer competing for the entire audience. If you're ESPN, you're only competing for the types of people who want to watch sports. If you're the Sci-Fi Network, you're only competing for the types of people who want to watch science fiction. And that's a subset of the larger population. But once you're, say, the Sci-Fi Channel, you can say, oh, okay, here's the audience we have. What would work for this group for these people? What's going to set them on fire and get them addicted to our channel or our platform or our streaming service? And I don't think it's any coincidence that I can't speak for the on-demand or the streaming platforms, but I remember seeing an article in like 2002 that total viewing of cable channels, of all cable television, had finally surpassed all broadcast television. And it was like 3 years later that all of a sudden we started getting these really, really good, direct to cable TV shows. And so when they finally had the bigger slice of the television cake, that was when that was around the time they started having the budgets to do their own stuff instead of just syndicating Law and Order, reruns.
Reruns. It's your focus is when you've come home and you've decided that there's something on Netflix you want to watch. What are you looking at these days?
Boy, I'm trying to follow a lot of these superhero based properties as much as I can. So that's roughly half of that these days are the CW shows. There's also the FX, or either FX or Fox has the Gotham show.
Oh yeah.
The Agents of Shield, and
I heard wonderful things about that.
I again, because I'm always getting caught up after the fact, after everything has happened. Like a lot of television, most of them have their ups and downs. They get good for a while, or they start slow. They start a little shaky, but then they find their ground, or you'll start on a show and inexplicably season 3 just is kind of a slog, but then season 4 picks back up. I
think effects have gotten a little more affordable for shows too, so they can have superheroes doing things that before might have cost quite a lot more than they do now.
Right, which is otherwise, if you were doing these things 20 years ago, they would just look cheap, and in the 1950s, nobody cared in the Superman TV show that George Reeves bursts through a wall that turns out to be made of paper, but these days today's audiences just aren't as forgiving.
They will not stay seated for that.
And and one of the things that that I follow as much as I can is the Marvel Netflix series, which is and you can, individual seasons or individual shows are better than others, but I find it to be a very interesting form of storytelling because what they're doing a couple of things that I find very interesting. The first is they're engaged in long-term, long-form storytelling in a way that most television isn't. In that you do a season with this character, and then you do a season with a different character, and then you do a season where you bring everybody together, but that's all still one long-form story that all connects to each other. So that would be analogous to, like if your medical drama show and your police procedural show and your, and your whatever, on the same network, all lived in the same universe and we're all building to something, which,
cool.
Just you don't see a lot of. And the other thing that I find that's very interesting about it is instead of doing that in the context of one show that everybody is part of, it's 4 or 5 different programs, each of which can have its own sort of tonality, so that the different programs don't all look and feel and sound alike. They've got they feel like their own thing, but they still work within the larger context. So something like a Luke Cage, the first season of it felt like you were watching a long-form televised version of like a blaxploitation movie, set in in a contemporary period, and it works. But it's but then the next show has a different tone.
That's cool. Say thank you so much for taking the time, and it's been a great trip here. Anyway, I just really enjoyed being able to reconnect a little bit with you and catch up, and also just to chat a little bit about this. Is a topic that I've certainly been investing a certain amount of energy in myself, and so just Thank you, Nathan. And
You too.
Nathan Irwin, everyone, friend and roommate in college, and also program director for WCBU in Peoria, Illinois. Also, he puts together the Out and About podcasts available through the WCBU website, and I'll include a link to that in my show notes. Again, Nathan, so good to talk to you again. Thank you so much. Crunching some numbers. Really quickly, since wow, this thing is running long, I noted that as of this episode I've caught up with my current collection. I've cataloged through disc 517 in my classic collection, recorded to this point mostly at 2 hours per disc, representing about 1,040 hours of media. In my current collection, I have cataloged through disc X167, which at 6 hours per disc represents a little over 1,000 hours of media. Together, that's more than 2,040 hours of media, or put it another way, in just a little over a year of pursuing this project, I have cataloged nearly 3 months' worth of media. In the past month I have spent not recording a new episode. I have stepped away from this project a bit. I felt a spirit of freedom, particularly in the last couple of weeks, where I've taken some time to reflect and recharge a bit. I want to refresh my approach to VideoFuzzy. I absolutely want to get this project back on track and return to a more regular, more current, and for gosh sakes, more manageable commentary on what I'm finding in this archive. But I also need to be okay with taking the time it takes to do this properly. I want the podcast you receive from me to be thoughtful, more focused. I want to explore the connections I find in my media archive and present them with the joy I find in that discovery. I want to step away from the sense of obligation and take on a sense of adventure. At this point, I am, numerically at least, 1/5 the way through my classic collection, and as my current collection is boundless, I'm resolved to know what can be known and find what I can find. As I determined in my reaction to the final cut up there, to discover what is discoverable, to value what is valuable, and to remember what is memorable. Upcoming shows. Now that I've caught up with my current collection, there's an aspect of VideoFuzzy that has consistently fallen by the wayside, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to address this. Upcoming shows. Comprehensive as I try to be, there's just about always going to be something coming up that I'm aware of. For instance, off the top of my head, I know we've got Better Call Saul returning for its 4th season on AMC shortly. Also, I wanted to warn you about a show that looks just awful. I saw a promo of FBI on CBS. They turned Law and Order's Dick Wolf loose once again to get us all wee-weed up about scary, violent minorities and the stalwart law enforcement officials protecting us from them. I could be wrong, but just going from the promos, this looks like another series-shaped screaming red alarm blaring to keep us all frightened and distrustful of each other. That's bad, but I saw something else go way too far in the other direction. In something called God Friended Me, Miles Finer, a young atheist and podcaster played by the Mayor's Brendan Michael Hall, is surprised and puzzled to receive a friend request from, would you believe it, God.
Oh, you crazy kids and your texting.
God himself pops up on this guy's phone to get him reaching out and helping people. Ooh, keeping them out of trouble, keeping them from committing suicide. Oh, you saved my life. Praise be. Oh, wow, how intriguing and speculative. And get this, he's an atheist, but his father is a preacher. How exciting. We'll be having conversions by the billions coming up when God Friended Me opened in September. Miraculous, powerful stuff happening on the TV. It's called writing. It's also called schmaltz, and it's called crap. And guys, it's 2018. We've seen enough openly cynical, self-serving hypocrisy from organized religion that maybe we shouldn't be basing entire productions around it. If people want to be religious on their own time, fine. But I think in this day and age, not to mention the anti-intellectual climate we find ourselves in, maybe it'd be a better use of resources to, say, follow a team of scientists around exploring sound environmental policy and the problems caused by not vaccinating our children, or enforcing food and drug safety policy, or the decline of public schools, or what happens when people don't feel like they can trust corporate-driven news media, or even their fellow citizens, addressing some of the real-world problems we're dealing with out here in consensus reality, you think? Also, more for me than the rest of you, but I saw where they're re-airing second season episodes of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency on the BBC America, so I'll finally get another chance to check those out. Finally, I saw a promo where Sinner is returning for a second season on USA, which, if it's anything like the first one, should be about 7 episodes of... what the hell? Followed by 1 episode of towering, imperious this the hell, this the actual hell, all the hell, now with more hell, and room for extra hell, and steerage with options for additional hell as needed. What I'm saying, if it's anything like the first season, the show plods along quite a lot, but presents some epic payoff in the end, so generally I'd say it's worth it. And with that, again, thank you so much for your patience with me, and thank you for checking in on my video cataloging project. Thanks also again to Nathan. So good seeing you again this past month. You can all check out my catalog listing along with audio links at videofuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts and iTunes at videofuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook, or you can follow me at TJVideoFuzzy on Twitter. For VideoFuzzy, I'm Terry J. Aman. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.